should be a theme song playing, like the show's coming up.
You're live.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
We're good to go.
Okay. Hank, I can sort of tee us up and transition us from last week's meeting to this week, and then we can roll from there, if that's okay with you.
That would be wonderful.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time out to be part of the meeting and the discussion today. I think we've got about a dozen members of the subcommittee who are on right now, along with staff from DPI. So we got a good, robust group, and I think we can have a good conversation today. We are following a PEPSC meeting, a meeting of the subcommittee co-chairs into this meeting today, sort of as phasing into a new part of the process relative to the recommendations of the Human Capital Roundtable and where we go from here with the work. And Kim, you, I think, said you could share the PowerPoint if people would like to see it.
That is correct.
Yeah, we don't necessarily need to go through it. People would have seen it at PEPSC if you're a subcommittee co-chair. Hank and I would have seen it again last week, and then you had the videos that were available to you. We also have feedback that we have received as a result of the presentation to PEPSC. And Kim, did you share that with those notes with everybody on the subcommittee?
I shared the feedback with everyone this morning. Okay,
so people have the feedback from individual respondents to a feedback tool, and then the ENCACTI summary that, excuse me, was sent out on February 1st. So people have that as well. So as we were thinking through the conversation today, and we've got about 90 minutes, one part of today is about reactions, responses, and thoughts, excuse me, thoughts on the revised sample presentation that was shared with PEPSC and that has or will be shared with the state board. And I'd like to reiterate, it is not a proposal for the plan. It is a sample for the structure and the organization of information for the next conversations and the next steps. So that's what we are responding to. And then after some time to have an open conversation about people's responses and reactions to the plan, then a discussion about continued development of the model. So where do we take this moving forward in terms of continuing to flesh out and refine the model as a proposal? Hank and Kim, did I cover the basics of this?
That sounds right.
Okay.
Sounds like the plan.
So I'll open the floor to comments and questions and thoughts.
If it's okay, I'll start with one. As I was reading the feedback from the field, it became really clear that the model and the presentation of the model was still very unclear to a lot of people, because I think a lot of our practicing teachers felt like they were going to be penalized by this particular proposal, and I don't think anybody thinks that that's the case. In fact, I've heard Tom say numerous times that there would have to be some grandfathering in to make sure that those teachers were not hurt by this new model. So I think we've got some work to do on how we present this and how we clarify the language in a way that makes it unmistakable to people who are actually doing this job, how it'll affect them and those who are going to be doing this job. So I'll leave it at that.
This is Jennifer. I'm on the ENCACTI committee that part of the ones that wrote their proposal. And I think part of the problem is that our biggest concern is that EPPs have already been struggling with the ins and outs in trying to manage the residency program. And if anyone is from an EPP here and has a lot of residency students, this is like a full-time job trying to keep track of all their stuff and where they belong, and that having all these different entry points is going to complicate that matter even more. And I'm not sure how many EPPs are going to be able to manage, or have the resources to manage that kind of administrative requirements that are going to be required to keep all of those different avenues coordinated.
Diane, your hand up.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Van. I was, like Hank, I was pleased to see the feedback from the field. I know that over time, the participation in some of our meetings has changed, and I know it's difficult for P12 teachers and others to come to these meetings, especially in the middle of the day. Could you tell us a little bit more about this feedback mechanism? I just didn't realize it was going out, and would just like to learn how representative it is, and is there opportunity for more feedback, or how we might be able to support that? Thank you.
Kim, Tom, or Andrew, Diana, you're talking about the feedback where people could give the open-ended responses.
Yes, was this like a survey that was posted? I'm curious about the mechanism for that.
No, it's not a survey that's posted. It is at the presentation, Dr. Miller indicated that anybody who had questions about this could reach out to him directly. And so he is just passing on any comments he gets from the field to staff, and we are collecting that and providing it to the subcommittees. So there's no, to answer your question, we cannot assert that it is representative of the teaching force at large.
So, thank you, Dr. Tomerlund. May I ask a follow-up question very quickly? And would it be safe to say that these would primarily be people who had the opportunity to listen to that presentation or one of the presentations to be able to send that input or feedback to Dr. Miller?
Yes, either that or a retweet or something like that. Yes, that would be, they would have to be directly or indirectly knowledgeable of the presentation.
I have a quick question. This is Olivia. With respect to the feedback that is coming in, and I'll certainly take a closer look at the feedback at a later time, but to Dr. Tomberlin, more specifically, are you prepared to do a synopsis of the feedback, or do you want to wait until a later time to do a component called feedback for the State Board of Education?
So I'm hesitant to do a summary if it's not representative, as it was just pointed out. I mean, I don't want to provide feedback to anyone to suggest that this was kind of a concerted effort on the part of either staff or PEPSC to collect feedback on the proposed model from the field. I think we have conducted feedback with groups like the Governor's Teacher Advisory Council and some, I think, Julie Pittman, the superintendent's teacher engagement advisor, has done some informal feedback groups. I would feel much more comfortable in gathering information from those groups where we can see that it may be at least somewhat more representative across the board. I I don't know a lot about these teachers, where they're from, or what their particular demographic makeup is. But we can do whatever serves the subcommittees.
I think at some point the feedback piece will be, will cause the state board members to hold up their heads and listen very carefully to feedback, and perhaps at a later time you might want to give some attention to a more structured, representative sample of feedback, so that at some point it can be presented to the State Board of Education. It's a great idea.
Sure. I would say it would be very interesting to know how folks in the preparation programs feel about this as well. I think that's
this is Dr. Jennifer Russell again I'm in the preparation program, and I think what I personally and other EPPs are struggling with is here, all these years we've been focusing on the quality of teacher preparation programs and the quality of the students that we produce. And now all of a sudden we are going to be shifting and allowing people who are not prepared to teach children for a number of years before they are fully qualified to teach students. And I find that kind of like talking out of both sides of our mouth. Like here, we're so concerned with teacher quality, yet we're going to let all these candidates come into the field and actually teach students without the qualifications to teach. And the way I always tell my undergraduate students when they walk into a classroom for the first time is that you're teaching those kids, and that kid in your room, he only has one time in the first grade. He's got one shot at the first grade. And if you're not at your best, then you have just basically messed up that shot. And I think about all of these teachers that we have in the field that are not qualified to teach and are under the additional stress of trying to take coursework. And I mean, I have a ton of residency students in my program, and the stress that they're under trying to take coursework, complete PPAT or TPA, get their test passed, and do all these things, they're under an enormous amount of stress to try to complete all these things while teaching. And I don't think it is going to lead to positive outcomes when that has been such a focus of teacher quality for so many years with EPP.
So I hear you. And if that is your position, then I think that would be a recommendation to this body to change the entry path to no teacher may teach in the state of North Carolina except going through an approved EPP program.
It just seems like that is not very popular at the moment. And, I think one of the things that we're trying to do, and I don't think we're really getting to the root of the problem, is our problem is we don't have enough teachers. I get that. I know we don't have enough teachers. But I don't really think we're looking at why we don't have enough teachers. We could get more teachers through the EPP program, but I'm telling you right now, I have a bunch of students in my undergrad program. They're not going to be able to move forward next semester because they haven't passed praxis. So I can't move those students forward because they haven't passed praxis. Then I'm going to have another whole bunch of students who aren't going to be able to move forward again because they haven't passed the other tests, because we don't let them move forward until they pass the test. And it's like, I feel like, but you're taking those qualifications or those requirements away from the traditional student. And I just feel like it's like talking out of both sides of our mouth. We say the tests are so important, but then we have all these paths where we say the tests aren't important. And actually, eventually, if after so many years you're a great teacher, you don't even have to pass the test. And I just don't think that it's like giving like a million different messages, and I just don't think it's consistent, and I don't think it breeds popularity for good teachers.
Jennifer, this is Van. Did the Advisory and Policy Committee of NCACT meet? Have they met since the PEPSC meeting?
We have met. We met last week, and we have another meeting coming up.
Can you share if the discussions since the PEPSC meeting are consistent with the February 1st feedback, or are there differences that may have developed that you can share?
Oh, because that feedback form that she sent us was our February 1st feedback form. Is that what you're telling me? I'm sorry. I was at Duke all morning, so I'm trying to get myself caught up here.
Yeah, we have the February 1st NCACT report to PEPSC from the committee.
Yeah, and what I will say is the NCACT meeting that we had last week was very heated, and there were a lot of people that were incredibly upset with the latest proposal regarding the path to licensure. The whole idea of the structure and the pay and all of these different components, I just think there was a lot of negativity in regards to most of what we saw in that format. And I guess then many of us were confused because there's a lot of us on that committee that are also in all these subcommittees, and we couldn't figure out how we got to that place because none of us remember talking about it. And I can't say that I don't remember because I have missed a number of meetings because of health concerns, because I've been out at doctor visits and stuff. But so I have missed a couple meetings. So I can't speak of that. I don't want to say that I might have missed something, but many people said that they didn't understand how we got to that place because that's not what we were talking about in our meetings. So we were very confused by the disconnect of what was in the subcommittee meetings to what was the final proposal.
Dr. Dempsey, may I make a comment?
Yeah, let me check. Diana, is your comment a follow-up to Jennifer's before we go?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Diana, and then we'll go to Tom.
Okay, thank you. I think just to follow up on Jennifer, I'm a member of that Advocacy and Policy Subcommittee with Jennifer and some others on this call also. I think I will pick up the point that she made that there were some things that appeared in the proposal that we had not talked about. One of those was a qualitative growth review. We hadn't really discussed that as part of prep and entry and how that might be a part of things. I think there was some concern about quality and rigor of different multiple matrices of options for micro-credentials and where that would come from as opposed to EPP completion, which I think was Dr. Tomlin's point a moment or so ago, particularly when we know that the North Carolina EPPs have the greatest and longest lasting impact on student learning in North Carolina. And we saw that was not as clearly represented as perhaps some of the EPPs who take that as a point of pride would have really appreciated to see. And I think I'll mention this point being an educator who identifies as an educator of color. I'm not seeing how, and so I'll let this be my point, I'm not seeing how this model is going to help diversify the profession yet, very clearly. And I think that's a really important point if we're going to connect with other initiatives across the state, and how are we going to diversify the profession when we are still leaving in some mechanisms that we know have been barriers. So those would be a few more comments there, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that the term final model came out. This is not a final model. This is an example of how this all could fit together. So there were some pieces that were never discussed that had to be provided to provide a comprehensive pathway for all teachers. And so in the presentation materials, it clearly states that this is to be a starting point from which the subcommittees to change anything they don't like, to create those changes where they can. It has always been our expectation, and our purpose behind this was that it's easier to edit than it is to simply generate. And so we put all the things out there that we think would make a fully functional model, and we fully anticipate you to take those things out that you don't like and put the things that you do want in there.
And Tom is one example, and then Jeff raised his hand. The qualitative growth review component would that be an example of something that was discussed in another subcommittee that is in the PowerPoint that we shared, that we saw last week?
No, it was simply our recognition that if you have measures of effectiveness, you have 40% of the population for which you'll have a quantitative measure of effectiveness through EVOS, and about 60% of the teaching population that would have nothing. So we created that just as a placeholder. Somebody needs to think about, what are you going to do with teachers who are not in subjects with tested with statewide assessments?
Thank you. Jeff?
Thanks, Dr. Dempsey. And I think Tom answered sort of what I was going to share, and then your question helped to get at it. But on the qualitative growth review, I thought that the proposal that was shared actually captured the discussions, and I'm on all 4 of the subcommittees and have attended most of the meetings, not all of them, but most of them, captured a lot of the themes that were discussed. And particularly, there had been a lot of discussion in, I think, the licensure and the advancement committee about wanting to make sure that observation and principal feedback was a key part of this. And I think the peer proposal actually captures that quite well, while also pulling in the student surveys. The thorniest issue that needed to be resolved with this is, how do we measure effectiveness? And the qualitative growth review, to me, it looks like something akin to the analysis of student work, which was something that DPI many years ago, and Tom might be shuddering now that I said that, that actually the legislature did away with. It looks similar to that, which actually was developed from input from the field as a way to measure growth of students and effectiveness of teachers. So I thought it was a good take on trying to tackle that. The only other way I think to feed into that would be to reinstitute something like the NC final exams, with the General Assembly also eliminated, which would then give you a standardized test growth measure for every subject and every grade level across the school, which may mean that you don't need the growth review then. I don't know, but that's another way to potentially skin that. But I felt like that the proposal actually captured a lot of the discussions quite well across the way, particularly the discussion on wanting to include observation. I thought that the peer review proposal was a very creative way to capture that and to build that sort of 360 kind of feedback into the process.
Well, the EPPs had a real issue with the peer review process, because we feel that you have to be trained in order to do peer review at a level of which where you're asking where it is consequential. I mean, doing peer review I've done peer review in schools for the idea of sharing ideas, but when it is consequential and the measure or the instrument that you're using is going to be making a decision about that teacher's movement forward or growth or whatever, I don't think regular teachers, and I think that creates sort of a really weird dynamic in a school where teachers are reviewing other teachers for consequential reasons. I think peer review on its surface as a way to gain information and share and grow is great, but I don't think on a consequential basis where you're using an instrument that is going to measure teachers is good for people who have not been trained and properly in supervision.
This is Jeff again, Dr. Dempsey. On the testing question that Jennifer raised earlier, testing has been one of those barriers that has been listed as a potential issue at both getting more teachers into the profession, but also at diversifying educators. We know that there's a lot of barriers built into the system that tend to keep some teachers out of the profession. And if it's, this proposal seeks to allow ways for teachers to become fully licensed without having to pass the praxis or the TPA. And so if there's barriers in the preparation side for testing to getting more candidates into and through our schools of education, if, maybe that's something else for us to consider, that the Praxis 1 or whatever other tests are required upon entry into an EPP, maybe we need to consider removing those barriers as well. Just another thought to the comments.
Thanks, Jeff. Can I ask two more questions for the NCACT folks on the call who are on the policy and advisory and policy committee? One, I sent an email to Chris earlier today. In the pathway, in the revised pathway proposal that the NCACT document includes, in license 2, there is a bullet on affiliation with the EPP, with an EPP, but on license 1, that affiliation is not there. Was that intentional, and what's the rationale for 2 but not 1?
Dan, it's Diana here. If I may ask, is that a question for the NCACT committee or for the perhaps Dr. Tomlin and DPI in presenting it? I wonder if it was just a bullet that was left off, or is that the question?
Well, no, this is in the document from the committee.
I misunderstood. I apologize.
Yes, I'm asking, excuse me, you and Jennifer. I'm curious as to why the NCACT committee saw the affiliation with EPPs in license 2, but they didn't see it in license 1.
This is Lydia Hedrick from Davidson County Schools. I'm just thinking from a licensure standpoint, if maybe the reason it was only listed on license 2 is because the timeline that it takes to become accepted and affiliated with an EPP is rather lengthy. So you really do have to, you would have had to apply by January to start summer sessions. So that makes me wonder, if that timeline is why they didn't put it on license 1, because there's no way to make it happen that year.
Yeah, and as someone that's on that committee, Lydia, that captures a lot of what we were thinking, because if you also notice the time limit on the license is there's only 1 year allowed on the license 1 in the NCACT proposal. And the idea was that, just as Lydia said, right, our districts are needing folks to get into the buildings, and so they can spend that 1 year finding their, almost like what we do right now with the emergency licenses or permits to teach, right? And they don't have to necessarily affiliate with an EPP at that point while they're on one of those licenses. And so that's where the proposal kind of differed from what was presented from PEPSC, in that license 1 was limited to only 1 year while you're getting that affiliation, and then you have 3 years within the license 2 within what NCACT proposed.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron. And you mean in that explanation, affiliation would be equivalent to what we currently call affiliation with residency, but affiliation. Let's make it a little a affiliation. It could be partnering. So in license 1, while there might not necessarily be a formal affiliation, there could be a partnership relationship. So the university could be engaged with the district in the mentoring, support, teacher supports, kinds of things that a person in license 1 would be doing. Or are you literally saying in license 1 there's no relationship with the university?
I mean, there could be, but that would require, I guess, districts to, if I'm understanding you correctly, districts to have partnerships with EPPs that they would then support all the teachers on a license 1 within that district, whether or not that license 1 candidate was actually working to big A affiliate with that EPP. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. I think I understand what you're saying. I'm actually suggesting something much simpler, which is, and I would say the same thing is true at the apprentice level. There is a school-university partnership that's in play and they partner in whatever ways they bring to the partnership to support the teacher, regardless of which point in the pathway they may be, even out to license 4 and 5, that the partnership arrangement would be in support to practitioners who are in those roles. It's obvious with the EPP with license 3, but in my mind, what we're doing is taking the power of the knowledge base that currently is exercised and applied in what we call EPPs, and we're making that more accessible and available across the entire pathway. So the explanation that using the capital A affiliation, yeah, that makes sense. But as an individual, I'd hope we can figure out ways to make what we know about EPPs is powerful in the preparation of a teacher, to make that knowledge base and those strategies more comprehensively available.
Because I would agree with you, even 1 year of somebody being out in the field without that support,
right, we
don't want to happen.
Right. And then the second question in the, I think Jennifer said earlier, what the NCACTI committee sees as the disconnects between the work that's been done in the subcommittee and the existing language. Are you keeping a list of those disconnected points so that we can see them? Is the NCACTI committee going to come back to either this subcommittee or to PEPSC and explain those disconnects so that we can potentially resolve them?
I will say that the NCACTI committee is meeting. I mean, because obviously last Thursday was the first time even anyone saw this proposal to be able to see what those disconnects are. But we are meeting again to explore more in depth the proposal that was presented last week to come up with some further communication.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And and I can bring that to the group of what aligning those disconnects. And I think Diana's got her hand up too.
She does.
Yeah, I think in terms of roles with that, Van, I think that the NCACTI group can certainly do that. I think that our perspective is definitely as EPPs, though, and I think some of those disconnects might also be present from more of a P12 perspective as well. And so it might be helpful for some of the other partners with different lenses and perspectives to bring that feedback to this group as well, so that we don't all go in with our blinders on. I think in these conversations, as some of them have borne out, and NCACTI has kind of stepped into a space to be advocates for higher ed in this space, sometimes it's we can then be easy targets for having our blinders on. So I would really want us to make sure that we have a really 360 view, which somebody else used that phrase a little while ago, from the field as well.
But you're going to share the ones you feel confident about. Okay.
Yep. We haven't been shy about that.
Yeah, I had not noticed that, so I appreciate that. Well, I will speak with my PEPSC hat on. I can tell you, as I think I speak for everybody, but certainly many people on the subcommittee, we want to know. That feedback is incredibly helpful, and so if a committee such as one with NCACTI sees those disconnections or those points where things have not been intersected, it's quite helpful to hear that.
Dr. Dempsey, this is Jeff Coltrane again. Can I ask a question from the NCACTI letter as well? I know the letter recommends removing testing barriers, particularly for entry into an EPP. Is there a recommendation for what would replace that, or would it just be the discretion of the EPP in determining which candidates enter the program?
I don't think we necessarily had a recommendation, but I mean, I think we could use some really easy things like A lot of different schools and departments say that students have to have a certain GPA before they can apply to that school, like School of Engineering or whatever, and we can use something like that, I'm sure.
And Jeff, I think you're referring to the reference to the Praxis Core that is listed in CACT.
Correct.
Yes. Yeah, so as Jennifer mentioned, I mean, many institutions, based on our national accreditation work as well, have multiple requirements for gateways into entry into our program, with testing being just one of them for us, that because it is state mandated. However, with the exemption that many of our candidates across the state don't have to take the test, but the ones that do, it tends to be a barrier for teachers coming into programs. And so that is why that recommendation is there, is that we have other ways, whether it is performance in courses. Many institutions, I can't speak for all of them, but many institutions have an introductory course where they are out in the field before they even enter into the program. So there's an opportunity to examine both interaction with students and dispositions and the like, as well as performance in general education courses. And so that is why that recommendation is there, because it is a barrier to a traditional four-year EPP entry that is not there for other pathways.
I mean, we're already saying that people who graduate with a 2.7 GPA to go in through residency don't have to take praxis,
right, or
licensure only. So why can't we have that GPA requirement for the first 60 hours of study at a four-year institution? I mean, it's not drifting that far away from what we're asking. And we're already saying they have to have that same GPA to graduate. So if their grades did drop, they wouldn't be able to finish the program anyway, below that 2.7. So we're getting the equivalent of them a 2.7 at the bachelor's degree, just like we're saying all these other students who are doing different entryways have to get in.
Is the 2.7 currently, what's the current, is there a GPA requirement for entry into an EPP program currently? Is that 2.7?
The state sets it at 2.7. Some have different thresholds.
Okay.
So what we're saying is, I know some of you are public school people, but so what it is our students have to have a 2.7 and pass practice core to get into our program, okay, on a traditional program. But what we're doing now is we're accepting students into our licensure only and residency program. And if they have a 2.7 GPA out of their bachelor's degree, they don't have to take praxis core. So why is that any different than our traditional students, if you really, really think about it?
For the record, let me say, if I had the power to drop praxis core today at 141, I would make it so. But I do believe that the reason core is not taken, it isn't the 2.7, is a bachelor's degree. If you have a bachelor's degree when you enter a program, you don't have to do core. So whether your GPA was 4.0 or 1.5, you don't have to do core, because it's the presence of the bachelor's degree that waives it. I would waive it at 141 this afternoon. I would eliminate it at 141 this afternoon if I had the authority to do so.
Well, and Van, like, if you look at it as our students, by the time they get a bachelor's degree, they can't have below a 2.7 or they can't finish the program. So we're all getting to the same place eventually. Do you know what I mean? So what I have you want to know what I have a lot of students do? You want to know what I have a lot of students at my program, at my school do? They finish their degree in lit studies and get over a 2.7 GPA. Then they come back to my school so they don't have to pass praxis, and they do my ed program in our adult ed program.
Is that Jennifer?
I have countless students who do that. Yeah, I have countless students who do that workaround all the time.
Yep. Jennifer, I totally agree. I absolutely agree. we have the same phenomena that occurs here. I would tell you right now, as a dean and to people on this call who can help exercise making this happen, because they do have the authority, eliminate the praxis core now. We didn't need the Human Capital Roundtable. We don't even need PEPSC. Eliminate it now. But the policy problem is it is attached to the bachelor's degree, not to the GPA. So if the GPA was dropped to 1.5, eliminate praxis core now. BA, not have a BA, GPA, not GPA, just eliminate it now. It predicts absolutely nothing, and it is a barrier to potentially very good teachers getting into the profession. Drop it today.
Because here's the thing about praxis core is there's nothing we can do to help them do better on it. I can help them do better on foundations of reading and even the new math CKT test. I can teach them that. I don't teach them what's on the praxis core, so I have no responsibility for that.
And by the way, I want to keep people apprised of time. We're about halfway through our time, and we do want to transition to looking at where we are on the pathways document. What further recommendations, refining, modifications do we need to make for this to be successful from our subcommittee's point of view? We're not to stop the previous conversation. We're just transitioning in time. So Hank, I've done a lot of talking. Have I missed any of the key things we needed to?
I don't think so. I was just, I don't know whether this is the right time or place to ask, but I would be interested from Dr. Oxendine and the state board's point of view, whether or not a model which did not include something like micro-credentials, another pathway besides an EPP, would be acceptable to the state board or entertained, or if that's something that the state board is really looking for at this point as an alternative pathway to earning credentials besides going through an EPP.
I think the State Board of Education, I'm unmuted. The State Board of Education would be interested in entertaining alternatives, of course. I think the State Board of Education, and I'm only one member, but I certainly feel like I'm in touch with their thinking on this. Number one, would want to know, why is the current model a stronger model than the one we currently have? Number two, lay out the pros and cons, which is similar to why is it a stronger model than we current. And I know some of the difficulties and some of the criticisms of the current model. The State Board of Education is going to be very concerned about this model being clearly explained to the publics, the stakeholder groups that are going to be most impacted by also explaining it to their stakeholder groups. So the more you can bring, remove abstraction from this and theoretical components of it, because the state board as a whole collectively, they tend not to think collectively, abstractly. So there you go. So alternatives, I mean, the more you can come up with practical, reasonable, understandable, sellable, marketable approaches to resolve some of the issues around licensure. I am a product of an EPP. I teach at an EPP. So I don't want much contamination with the EPP model either. That's got to stay in the PowerPoint. So those are my thoughts. I would like to, while I have the mic for just another 30 seconds, this is Olivia's philosophy, not necessarily the state board. I am an educator of color, and I have been in education for many, many years. Some of you may not have even been born at the time when I entered the field, but on the heels of the civil rights movement. And I'm going to say to you folks, I am a little bit bothered by the statement, and I'm not pointing the finger to any individual, this is collectively, when we constantly talk about barriers to getting in the field of education, and in the next breath we pivot to it's difficult to get diversity because of our barriers that are brought about by testing. To me, it's a little racist, because I'm going to tell you this. I came along at a time when there were no barriers removed to the teaching profession. The minority students and minority candidates who went after licensure, we had no barriers removed, and we did just fine. So we need to be, I guess what I'm saying is, let's be careful how we frame the discussion about barriers and almost automatically link it to diversity. Do you understand what I'm saying? Maybe I've said too much.
No, Olivia, that makes perfect sense, I think. I totally agree with you, but I'm probably not as old as you, but I think that there are so many more restrictions now. Like, to become a teacher has become so much more difficult. And I think the levels of testing and certifications and all of these things to be a teacher, and I mean, I've been a teacher in education for 30 years. That's my life. But I think we're dissuading people from wanting to come into the profession because of all of the testing requirements that we have. Like, I think there's just too many now.
You're probably
it's more about
right.
The quantity.
Right.
I think the quantity has gotten out of control. And I think because of the quantity of the other thing and this is something that comes into our first gen students and our low income students, is the cost.
Mm-hmm.
Is they cannot afford to take these tests. And if they don't pass it one time, I mean, I've had a lot of students, they take the practice core one time, they don't pass, they switch their major.
Right. The other
because
thing,
they don't want to pay to take it again. That's
true. There is a cost factor that the State Board of Education, we discussed that a couple of years ago, and I think maybe someone from it could have been Dr. Tomberlin or someone from the ESP arena did a cost analysis of how much does it cost an undergraduate seeking a license to be a teacher. What does it cost? Let's say a special education major. I guess my final point on this is this: the teaching profession is not the 20th century profession. That it really has changed. It's a different profession. And there are many barriers. And some of it is just that, my opinion is that the profession is not as attractive as it once was. 25, 35, definitely 50 years ago. So I think whatever we do around licensure and policy around licensure, somewhere we have to keep in mind that it isn't a 20th century profession. It's a different profession today than it was. It doesn't have that automatic draw that it did in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and probably started really shifting in the 90s. And I certainly didn't mean to turn this into a history lesson.
Tom has his hand up, and I'm going to exercise a little co-chair privilege. Dr. Oxendine, my point on Praxis Core is we force students who want to become teachers to take an exam that has little to no predictive value of their ability to complete the program of study or what the potential quality of their practice will be. The results of that exam disproportionately excludes people of color from the profession. But my primary concern with CORE is we are telling students to clear a hurdle that in no way informs their potential to be successful EPP students or successful teachers. And that's a barrier for the profession as well as those individual students who don't pass it. So if we need a better tool to accomplish what we think that tool is accomplishing, I would have no problem with that tool. But the one we have right now is not serving the state of North Carolina well. And
yes, and I've heard that about Praxis Core. Definitely, perhaps a different instrument might be of importance to study.
Thank you. Tom, you're muted if you're talking.
Hi, thank you. So this goes back to a question that, or a statement that Dr. Weddington made that I'm a little confused about. So it seemed, Dr. Weddington, that you made the comparison between a net prep program and micro-credentials. And I think the accurate comparison is between micro-credentials and licensure exams. Micro-credentials aren't a preparation program. They're a method of demonstrating the effectiveness that the licensure exams are ostensibly capturing about our teachers. So I'm a little confused about that almost as a micro-credentials as a program rather than just a demonstration of the competencies that we're looking for.
No, and I think, yeah, thanks, Tom. I think that's the clarification that's needed in the model, because I think what I'm hearing from the field continues to be that micro-credentials would be used as an alternative for a program as opposed to a way to assess something that they got from a program that was approved by the state. So that's a helpful clarification that I think we really have to articulate well when this goes out.
Tom, could you explain that better? Would the micro-credentials be a replacement for those who cannot pass licensure exams? I don't understand at all then what it's for.
Yeah, it's a demonstration. So presumably our licensure exam is meant to tell us, our licensure exams are meant to tell us that these teachers have the necessary content and pedagogical skill to function as a classroom teacher. What the micro-credential would do is provide an alternative. So I wouldn't quite frame it the way you just did, and if they can't pass the licensure exam, it's an equivalent option that if someone wants to demonstrate their ability to be a classroom teacher through competency rather than through a standardized test, that option is open and available to them. It's not a program like, if you do these micro-credentials, we're saying that you completed an educator prep program. I'm not clear where that message got, because they're clearly placed with the licensure exams in the model. They're not, as well as the peer review process. So those are all alternative methods to demonstrate the competency, which is the basis for moving the license from an initial license to a professional license.
But that's only, those micro-credentials would only be available for people who are not in a traditional EPP path.
Well, I don't understand why that would be the case.
That was a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. It sounded like a statement. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I absolutely think they would be, and I think they probably be highly leveraged by non-IHE affiliated EPPs.
Okay. I think one of the things that screamed at the EPPs, and Diana and Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, is the complexity of who is going to be able to understand all of these details. I mean, when residency licensure first came out, I spent hours emailing and talking to people and trying to explain to people what residency licensure was and how it worked. And there was a big disconnect between the LEAs and the EPPs, and everyone had different ideas, and it was so confusing. And I feel like this is very confusing, and I don't know how we would simplify it to make it less confusing for all parties involved.
I agree with that. Even when I try to explain to staff, this is Lydia Hedrick from Davidson County again, put it in writing, step by step, this is what you need to do first, next, then, it's near impossible for them to grasp exactly what needs to happen. It is a challenge as it is currently, and then to add all these different pathways, which I understand the purpose of that is to provide more opportunities to enter into education. But it does make me wonder, then, are we going to make choosing teaching a backup plan for people? Get your regular degree, and then if you don't find a job that suits you, you can always come back and be a teacher. I went the traditional pathway, so clearly I see some value in that. And I think that there should be a second chance for people that have experience with education and they decide this is what I was always meant to do. But I don't want to make teaching anybody's backup plan.
Tom, has the subcommittee on budget and compensation addressed the question of structures that would have to change given the proposed pathway? So, for example, if one were using micro-credentials at some point in the pathway, that's going to take a different kind of organizational support and monitoring that the traditional certificate, that's different from the traditional certification structure.
I don't think they've addressed that in the compensation structure or in the budget. So I'm finding myself saying this a lot lately, and so I'll say it again. So all this work right now is in the policy arena, not in the implementation arena. Okay. So certainly there will be implementation costs that go along with this that we haven't contemplated or costed out yet. But in response to Ms. Hedrick from Davidson County, I think I totally agree with you that this is a much more complex model. But the issue is how do you incorporate authentic career pathways for teachers and better support for where the teachers are in their stages of development without the model being somewhat complex. I mean, that's something we struggle with staff when we think about this, just in developing this kind of straw man model for you folks to respond to is what is the right tension there? Because if it's overly simplistic, then you can't you're going to find yourself without career opportunities and without real support for teachers, given their level of facility and expertise in the field. So we were leveraging the licenses to do that work. So, I mean, it's a great question, and I'm highly sensitive to it. I just don't know how to solve for that problem.
Well,
I think in the budget, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just think in the budget, or it's going to be one of these things. Is who's going to be the point of contact to flush all of this out? Because the problem is I feel as if the EPPs and the LEAs don't have the staff or support mechanisms in place to support the minutia details that this is going to involve, and even answering all the questions. And I mean, my institutions are not going to hire somebody to take care of alternative licensure. Like, it's not going to happen. So, I don't know if the bigger institutions will be able to I don't know if your institution will be able to hire someone just to do that. But I mean, I don't see it happening at a smaller institution. So
who manages it now for residency license? Is it the school district that manages it, or is it the institution?
It's an institution.
So I
mean, there's
and I would say it's both, because from the school district perspective, we've got to make sure that these people are eligible for a license. So it's going to be both sides are having to manage this process.
It's both. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you out of that, but it's like, but we have to make sure that they have the grades. We have to make sure that they're enrolled in classes. We have to sign the form. And like, we're coming into this thing right now, they want us to sign all these residency forms, but we don't know if they're enrolled next semester. And so we don't feel comfortable signing the form, because then how do we unsign the form when they don't come back in the fall? And so, I mean, there's all of these details that have not been flushed out by anyone at DPI that we're trying to kind of figure out on our own. But it's an immense, like, it's a Herculean task to keep track of all these residency people. I mean, I'm just saying. And I know it's even more for the school districts. They have more of them. I mean, I have how many I have, but the school district has probably hundreds, you know? So, yeah.
Dr. Dempsey, this is Jeff. I wanted to chime in on the complicating, the comments, questions around complication. And I'm not saying that this model is simplistic, because it's not in any form or fashion. But I'm not sure that it's any more complicated than our current system. I don't think we look at our licensure system in this continuum like we are now, because there are, and Dr. Tomerlin can correct me if I'm wrong, there's like 6 different licenses you can get. You've got emergency licenses and provisional licenses, and then an initial license and a residency license. And then you finally get to a CPL, and all of the requirements for those are different. And then maybe you have an initial license, but you haven't passed the test. So now you've got a limited license, and then there's different requirements for if you've got the limited license, how many times you have to take the test, and if you've passed it or not. And then the district's got to decide if they can actually keep you employed because of all these different requirements. And so I'm not saying this is a simplified model, but I think if we look at if we think about the candidates that are coming into the profession now and where they would fit on this time frame, 3/4 of our current traditional EPP students, so students who go and complete a bachelor's degree from an EPP, would actually fit right into License 3, no changes to their status. They pass the test, they pass the NTPA, they complete the courses, they're License 3. Just like now, if they would get a beginning teacher license or an IPL. There is no change in this system for them. It's exactly like it is now. Those 3/4 fit into that. The 1/4 that don't pass the test on the first try, they would come in as License 2. And then they could take the test again, and if they pass it, they become License 3 right away, easy peasy. If they can't pass the test, then they can decide to try and pursue License 3 through some other mechanism, which is, we always talk about multiple paths. This gives them another path to that. Or they just say, I'm going to demonstrate my effectiveness for 3 of the first 5 years of my teaching career, and I'm going to go straight to License 4. Done. They're into the profession. We don't have to worry about a limited license or how many times they've taken the test or when they took the test, which DPI has to track or the school districts have to track now. And then for the 30% of our beginning teachers, there's 30% of our current beginning teachers that come into the profession with no education background. That 30% of teachers are going to come in as License 1, and then they've got the pathways to get there. But already we're having to deal with them as residency licenses now. They've got to be affiliated with an EPP. They've got to be on enrolled in courses. They've got to be signed up to take the test, all the different things that this requires. But it doesn't require them to do those things. If they can demonstrate their effectiveness with the supports we've given them, they can get fully licensed. So while I don't disagree that this is not a simple license process, I'm not sure that it's any more complicated than the band-aided process we have now, because while our EPPs don't have to deal with limited and provisional licenses, our school districts sure do. And then any teacher that's called in that definitely does. And that's more complicated than we can probably imagine for those individuals. And we talk about the barriers are probably barriers to those people continuing in the profession. So I just think maybe comparing this to what we have now might help us to sort of see where this fixes things and where it doesn't. and then can help us make some further refinements to make it simple. Because I think some of the things we've identified today with the Praxis Core, maybe even some of the other testing requirements, I think we need to think hard about if those are things that we truly need in our licensure system, or if we think we've got the right processes and systems in place to adequately judge how teachers are coming through the system. But I don't know that I would say this is more complicated than what we currently have. That's just and I'm not saying it's simple. I'm just not sure that it's more complicated. I definitely think it's streamlined and probably simpler to administer from a DPI standpoint, which is obviously important, and maybe even from a school district standpoint, which is very important as well.
So I have a clarifying question because I've heard this a couple of times today, and I just want to make sure I'm hearing it correctly. So is it, because Tom, I appreciated you sharing about kind of the idea of micro-credentialing or the peer observation or whatever it may be is in lieu of the testing requirement as far as Praxis 2 or Foundations of Reading and whatnot. So am I correct in that when I look at this, that License 1, License 2, License 3, all of those have built within them that there is EPP completion in there at some point, whether it's IAG based or non-traditional or what any of the EPPs that are approved in North Carolina? Because I think that's the thing that I'm missing is that there's a star at level 3, but nowhere in any of the other levels really does it mention anything about, I mean, I know there was this idea of sponsorship by an EPP, but it doesn't mention that completion of an EPP is required in any of these levels. And I think for me, that would be helpful clarification. And I think Jeff just alluded to it as well in that. I don't know who else to answer that, but.
Yeah, so I think, quite honestly, to respond to that, we knew that there was a question of out there among the subcommittees, can you do this without an EPP? So I have a bachelor's degree. I go get a job with an LEA. Can the LEA support me through the demonstration of effectiveness and allow me to move through the licensure process? And then there was also talk about there is no movement through the licensure process without completion of an EPP. We did, to me, that's a bit of a third rail for NCDPI to wade into. So that is a question for the subcommittees. Does this path require formal enrollment in an EPP, however an EPP is defined?
Right.
Or can one, through the employer, move through the licensure process by meeting the competencies that have been established? I have to say we purposefully did not answer that question because we don't want to be on a side. We just kind of were as general as we possibly could. That question is a question for these subcommittees.
Hey, Aaron, can I roll out a response to that?
Yeah.
Today, and this will be a little Bill Clinton, triangulating. In my mind, this whole thing is built on what does the evidence tell us is the best preparation and professional support for a teacher to be effective in North Carolina as evidenced by impact on student learning. And what the evidence tells us is that the knowledge base, the supports for practice, the professional learning, the professional development that occurs in the structures of EPPs is what prepares a person to be the most effective. So to me, the answer to your question is whether you are an apprentice all the way up through license, whatever's 6. We want to give as many people as possible at as many points of access and contact as possible, access to that knowledge base, those professional skills and abilities and dispositions and experiences that are currently structured in credit hour driven preparation programs. We want to hold on to that because that's the gold standard according to the last year of discussion and to the evidence. But what we want to give is give people more access to it by having it structured in multiple ways that people can use to become and remain effective educators. So that, to me, is not about EPPs like the ones that sit at the universities. I think the universities have an opportunity to work with stakeholders, school districts in particular, to transform that knowledge base into ways that are more accessible to support more people who are becoming teachers and who are going to remain effective teachers. And I think that is, as speaking as a dean of a college of education, that is a massive opportunity. Now, to a point that Jennifer and a few other people have raised, that structure has to be funded because it's a different way of doing it, particularly, where's Jeff, is he still on? Particularly in the first 3 to 5 years where we are trying to figure this out, because it will be innovative, and innovation costs more on the front end.
Right.
That is, to me, I see Dr. Oxendown is still on. That's what I would explain to the public. This can be groundbreaking, innovative, and transformative, but we got to be strategic and tactical about how we get there, and it will cost money. But we will be in a very different place as a state after we've done that, and the EPPs can drive it.
And to your point, Dr. Gypsy, I think the more innovative we become and talk about and create alternative pathways, therein is where the General Assembly will want to know how much is this going to cost, because the infrastructure will be enormous. The need for very deep infrastructure to support teachers, even to support principals. And I don't want to pivot to a different discussion. This discussion belongs in the same family, I suppose, but there is a recommendation on the table to license the school leader, the principal, not necessarily one who has a teaching background. Okay, classroom teaching background there. So that means that we could have in North Carolina some percentage of principals without a K-12 pure teaching background, supervising, leading, and evaluating and serving on peer review committees of these individuals. Infrastructure, all caps.
And I think there are some of those models of innovation already in our state, both at traditional EPPs as well as non-traditional EPPs. But I agree with you, Van. This is, with challenges come opportunities for us to think differently about this. But I think that's one of the things that I would like to see highlighted more within the model is where EPP and that knowledge base that right now is housed greatly in EPPs, how that is infused through all of this.
And
Totally agree with you guys.
Jeff, I appreciate you commented earlier about structure. I will say our certification office and our personnel directors with whom we work with on a regular basis, and there are about 25 of those across the state, they tell us this is we got to shed a whole lot more light on this in terms of what it means for organizational dynamics and how we structure this than what the current system is presenting. But those are things that we would have to work out. I just got the 15-minute notice.
Thanks, Dr. Dempsey. That's good to know.
Not that it can't be done, but it just need a little bit more sunshine to get there. So, Kim, I think at the end of the last PEPSC meeting, the chair said we have a few more months to refine this and pull together what will be our part of the final proposal. I think he said about 3, if I'm remembering what Patrick said correctly.
I remember him talking about the end of summer. is what he was, what I remember.
Okay, so August. And so at this point, not so much taking the sample that was before PEPSC and before the board, but taking the structure and starting to maybe answer the question, what is the most appropriate manifestation of? So I'm thinking through the conversation today to use micro-credentials as an example. People aren't rejecting that micro-credentials can have a role. People want to have more clarity on what that role is. How do they get used in the pathways? And I think, and we need to be mindful of answering that question. How do we see the best use of micro-credentials in the pathways? As one example, moving forward, what is the best positioning of EPPs, both in License 3 and across the pathways? What's the best positioning of the evidence and the outcome tools that we're going to use in the final proposal? And that's the work between now and the end of summer. Tom, did I say that correctly and succinctly?
I thought that was beautiful. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I'm hearing surface from this conversation that I want to make sure we're capturing on our end to better facilitate the refinement process. And so I'm hearing some kind of clear articulation about what is an EPP, whether that's narrow or very broad. I see there's a continuum there, like that needs to be kind of, I think that's under the purview of this group, like what constitutes appropriate. I'll use the term we used in the model, supervision, like who's responsible for guiding these folks through the process. So we think about that as an EPP traditionally. Does that change under this model? Are there different options or are there not? And then I think with the question of micro-credentials, I think it's very important for you all to know that there's at DPI right now, there's two paths that micro-credentials are going down, and that is the one path is around continuing education credits and how folks can use demonstrated mastery to satisfy licensure renewal requirements. That's in the model as well. Those are not the micro-credentials we're talking about here. It seems to me that for us to leverage micro-credentials for a statewide system, those have to be defined and the same for all candidates. That you couldn't have local micro-credentials, let's say in Carteret County, and then Buncombe County has a different set of micro-credentials for the purposes of establishing licensure. They could for those CEUs. So I want to make sure when you start hearing more stuff about micro-credentials that we're talking about a very specific set that would be used for advancement in the licensure process. And then it's the last one. Can't remember what the last one was. I had them in my head and then I started talking. But yes, I think we can do some work on helping tee this up for the next meeting about what do we want to take down out of that model and what we want to put back in.
And there's just a couple of things in the chat that there's a question, there's a comment providing the state board with the menu of micro-credentialing and then how low wealth small districts support the varied pathways. Many don't have sufficient mentors. I mean, there are critical implementation questions that will, we don't know what they are until we finalize refining the structure, but there are going to be resource questions and needs that will be on the table. And I'm assuming also, Tom, at the next meeting, the ITSP, PEER, and the one that came up today, Qualitative Growth Review, we can explore more what those structures might look like and what they would mean in terms of implementation.
Absolutely. And again, I don't know that I can say this enough. I hope you all view these things as placeholders. Our job was to create something for you to disassemble and reassemble as you see fit. It is not in any way designed to say this is what it is and it can be nothing else. I mean, that was not the charge we got from Chairman Miller. We were responding to the idea, the general frustration in all 4 subcommittees that we can't understand how this looks in a kind of beginning to end scenario because we're only seeing one side of it. And so I can't stress enough that my feelings, Dr. Seiberg's feelings, Dr. Evans's feelings, not that we have any, would be hurt if things get taken out of this and replaced with something that you folks feel is a better option. That's precisely why we built it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tom. I might add as an individual point the conversation that we had earlier about the Qualitative Growth Review, and I know there was some concerns expressed out of the NCACT committee, but nothing would speak more essentially to the definition of what a profession is than the practitioners having primary responsibility for the assessment of other practitioners, in particular novice practitioners. That's a core component of professions. If you look at, what are the framing definitions of what makes a profession, what separates a profession from other occupations, and core to that is the peer support and assessment process. Doctors engaged in the assessment of other doctors, engineers engaged in the assessment of other engineers, not solely and in isolation, but as part of that structure. And so whether it's this particular way it's framed or another, having expert eyes on each other in the profession, not to make judgments about success and failure, but about enhancing the practice of peers, in particular novices. North Carolina would leap head and shoulders beyond other states if we could do that. And it would be such a leap forward for teaching as a profession if we could figure that piece out, not as a sole mechanism for doing it, but as part of that practice of how we understand professional practice and teaching. That would be a huge step forward. So I hope while we might not frame it exactly the way we're thinking about it right now, that remains part of the conversation. And Hank, we have 4 minutes left. I'm sorry I've done virtually all the talking in this meeting.
Sounded great.
Kim, any other points for the good of the order before our next meeting?
No, I will send out a doodle poll to, actually I'll touch base with you and Hank to help figure out the next meeting dates.
Perfect. Well, thank you all. I don't know that do we need a motion to adjourn, Kim?
You could take a motion to adjourn. We didn't start the meeting with a motion, but you could do one to adjourn.
We can entertain that motion.
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Thank you both. All in favor, please say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, DPI folks.
Thank you all.
Thanks.